I am Homer Flynn, president of the Cryptic Corporation. Cryptic is the business and PR interface for the residents. And you are listening to KFAI in Minneapolis, 90.3 FM on your dial.
I know like 2 weeks ago, or maybe 2.5 weeks ago, I listened to another interview that you recorded, I think for a Chicago station or something. And at that time, you were still talking about what people can expect on the tour. And so it was just recently it was called off. And was it mostly because of like the COVID worries, or there was something about a band member being trapped outside of the country?
Well, it's been a complicated situation, but it mainly has been the COVID situation. And it's kind of amazing how quickly all that turned around. A month, 5 weeks ago, everything was looking fantastic. And then it really seemed like within a 2-week period, everything just started going downhill like crazy. And it was not an easy decision to come to, but once again, there really haven't been any regrets. There is a member of the band who is immunocompromised. He is a kidney transplant recipient. And so there was a lot of concern around that and just a lot of concern in general. Everybody didn't have to worry every time that the tour bus stopped and, you had to go into McDonald's and get a hamburger and you're worried about, who's going to be breathing on you or whatever. I mean, it's just right. Everybody's vaccinated, but, it's not a perfect situation.
Yeah, certainly not. And so, the tour was originally supposed to be spring of last year and then was postponed to spring of this year and then postponed a few more months. And so then now it's called off, except for last I heard anyway, a few shows possibly in California. But at this point, are you thinking maybe the residents will come back and do this show in another year, or maybe the time has passed and they'll be on to something totally different? Or
well, honestly, at this point, it's hard to say. I mean, if there's anything that characterizes this era, it's uncertainty.
Yeah.
And they certainly, once again, the band is sounding great these days. They're really wanting to get out there and perform this show. I would say at this point, the soonest it could happen would be approximately a year from now. Now, they are still booked in Europe in late January and February. And, everyone is cautiously optimistic that will happen, but that tour's been canceled once already too. There are 3 shows still happening in California. I mean, overall, the COVID infection rate is low enough here, and the travel is easy enough that everybody felt pretty good about doing those 3 shows. I mean, one of them is in San Francisco. The other one is Santa Cruz, which is only 60 miles south. So it's not terribly demanding, and at least, they'll get to get out and perform. But who knows what happens after that? I mean, this went from being, the Metal, Meat, and Bone tour, which is their newest album, to being the 50th anniversary tour. And the 50th anniversary celebration really starts with the beginning of next year. So all of next year, it's still valid for that. But there are other things going on too. So, once again, nobody really knows.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about the 50 years. I knew that I don't know if the residents have an exact date that they consider. They started as the residents because I know, there were some like pre-residents jamming that went on, and the Delta Nudes and various recordings have come out. But I knew we were close to 50 years of the residents. So you're considering that 2022 possibly, or?
Yeah, they officially chart their beginning with the release of Santa Dog, which was Holidays 1972. So that will make, Holidays next year the 50th.
Okay, cool. And yeah, I mean, I've got to say it's actually quite an honor to be able to talk to you about the group today, because I've been into the Residents since probably the late 70s. So most of that time, I originally started getting away from commercial music and getting into punk and new wave and weirdo alternative and stuff. And I think the first thing I discovered was the Satisfaction single, the cover of the great cover of the Rolling Stones song, and then picked up the Third Reich and Roll, which was a lot more covers, but twisted through the Residents lens. And I've been with it ever since, through all the projects and everything. Actually, you wouldn't be expected to remember this, but I did actually get to chat with you briefly when you were here at the Fine Line Music Cafe with the Demons Dance Alone tour. And after the show, I got to speak to Molly Harvey for a while, and then I saw you schlepping equipment around, and asked you to give the Residents a message to me. Thank you for the years of music and everything. But so yeah, it's great. I've been into it all that time, and there's been so many wonderful projects. I want to ask you about a few of them. I don't know how much time you have. I got so many things I'd love to ask you about, but one of the things that I was so lucky to have experienced, especially since COVID came right after it, is in January 2020, I traveled to San Francisco. I don't know if you can see my T-shirt here.
I see. Yeah.
I got to see the dress rehearsal for the God in Three Persons concert and performance, which I guess after that, you just went and did a few shows at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So I thought that was such a wonderful thing. And I'm just wondering, that was just like the dress rehearsal and maybe 3 shows. Are you thinking of doing any more with that? Because it was fantastic, I thought, with the videos and like everything.
Yeah, well, I mean, once again, uncertainty rules, but there are plans to do a short tour of that in Europe next summer. At this point, Americans are not so welcome in Europe, which of course clouds the whole idea of the European tour in January and February, as well as the God in Three Persons kind of mini tour. But everybody would love to do that again. And I can't say how incredibly grateful and lucky everybody feels like, that those shows were slipped into the Museum of Modern Art before, bam, the door slammed shut. Because who knows whether that would have been able to happen, a year and a half later or whatever. So, and congratulations on being able to see it, because it was a pretty unique thing. And like I say, there's hope of doing more, but who knows?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I remember I think I just pledged like $75 to the lab, because that's where it was, and trying to raise money to keep them open. And like the prize was you got to see the dress rehearsal. So that was great. And I mean, that show, there was so much put into it. That was with John Sanborn. Is that correct? And he did all these I mean, there was videos and the whole deal. I mean, might make a great DVD someday or something. I don't know. It'd be great to see it like tour to different, like, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis or different places. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it is a genuine theater piece as opposed to, concert. And so the production level was pretty high. Once again, everybody was extremely happy with the way that show worked out, and just hope to be lucky enough to be able to perform it again.
Cool. And I guess, and we haven't really discussed the tour that was going to come here and that you might do the 3 shows in California. There was a video that you recorded that's on the Night Flight cable channel of some of the...
Yeah, it's actually, Night Flight has a streaming service now.
Streaming service.
Yeah, right.
So that was, I mean, was that kind of the costumes and the sort of thing we could have expected from the tour?
Yeah, that it would be like one half of the touring show. This started out once again as a show tour promoting Metal, Meat and Bone, the new album, and it was going to include a portion of Duckstab as an encore. Duckstab having been a longtime fan favorite. But then as things evolve, change, one tour gets canceled, and whatever. Now it's become the 50th anniversary tour. So the Metal, Meat and Bone component has been reduced to half of the show, and then Duckstab has been expanded from an encore to half the show. So the Duckstab stuff that you saw on Night Flight is one half of this show, and they're also preparing along the theme of 50th anniversary. They're doing an encore based on the third rock and roll album.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds great. And yeah, so people can see it. I guess it's on the Night Flight streaming service. You got to subscribe to that. But
exactly.
But yeah, I did subscribe to that because of that. But then they've also got a lot of cool stuff on there. There's other Residents stuff on there.
Night Flight has been very generous to the Residents over the years, and that the Duckstab Night Flight that you mentioned, John Sanborn did visuals and directed that, so he's very involved in that again too.
Right. Yeah, he's done a lot of work with you. Well, let's break, because you were talking about the newest album, Metal, Meat and Bone, which half of the show is going to be about. Tell us a little bit about that. That was the discovery of the blues recordings of Dying Dog and.
Yeah, the Residents for years and years and years, they love playing with different musical forms, and blues is something maybe they barely touched on here and there, but they've never really explored it to the extent that they wanted to. And there was a guy that was a friend of the Residents from back in the beginning, a guy named Roland Sheehan, and Roland. Residents knew him from college, from Louisiana Tech, and Roland still lives back there. And they make trips back to the South periodically for home visits or holidays, or whatever. And at one point, one of them was having lunch with Roland, and they mentioned the fact that they had been interested in doing some kind of blues-based project. But they never had found exactly the right angle, the right doorway to go through to get into it. They didn't want to do just a bunch of covers. So ultimately, at some point later, Roland gets back in touch with him, and he kept thinking about that afterwards. And he remembered this guy, Alvin Snow, that he had met and worked with back around the mid 70s or so. As a, wannabe blues singer. And so Roland told the Residents, I actually found some old demos that we did with Alvin. Maybe you might like to check them out. And the Residents kind of went, yeah, a bunch of old demos, sure. But they listened to them and they loved them. They thought they were great. So ultimately they wound up, there were like 10 different demos, and they wound up doing cover versions, their own interpretations of Alvin's 10 demos. And they were so inspired by it, they then did 6 more songs in the same style. So ultimately the album consists of 16 songs, all kind of Alvin-esque. And then the album also includes Alvin's 10 originals. So part of what's interesting about it is that you have 10 songs that you can compare 2 completely different versions of, one, the Alvin Snow originals, and then 2, the contemporary Residents interpretations.
Yeah, and you had even had some a guest vocalist, Black Francis of the Pixies, for one of the songs, "Die, Die, Die," and there's a cool video for that's out there, and so that.
Yeah, Eric Feldman who has been the Residents producer on the last couple of 3 albums, used to play with the Pixies. And at the point where the album was being finally mixed and wrapped up, Black Francis just happened to be in town. And Eric said, "Hey, you want to do a vocal on this song?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." I thought it turned out great.
Yeah, it is. It is. So yeah, I wanted to maybe jump in and talk to you a little bit about some of the Residents projects that I'm, that are my favorites, that are maybe not as well known. But one thing that I've loved about the Residents is that they're always finding different ways to do things and to interact with technology and to interact with their fans and their supporters and everything. And one of the ones that I was very impressed with was the whole Bunny Boy project, which I loved. And that was a great, it was an album, but then there was a whole series of YouTube videos, and Bunny Boy was trying to find his brother who was lost. And then it eventually got to be like there was an email address that was given out. And if you have any clues on how to help Bunny, or, any comments or whatever, you can actually email and speak with him. And it was actually kind of thrilling for me because years later, a few years ago, a book came out of the Bunny Boy emails. And I was in there extensively. I'm Jonathan the librarian, and I was telling Bunny that I'm an information detective and that I could help him try to track down information. And then I was warning him about spam and not falling for it. And anyway, I just and then there was a tour. I traveled actually to Chicago to see that show. But what are your memories or thoughts on the whole Bunny Boy thing?
Well, it was a great project. It's interesting that you got into it so much. It's certainly not one of the projects. To me, in a lot of ways, it never really got the attention that it deserved. But the book that you're talking about was a product. There was an installation in a museum, an art center in Bourges, France, which is 125 miles south of Paris. And the woman who is the director of that art center was a Residents fan. And so what happened was that not only did she put out that book, there was an installation that filled up the whole building. The building's like about 3 floors, and filled up the whole building with Residents artwork and artifact over the years. But also there was the Bunny Room was recreated as part of an installation, and it was a nice show. It was a nice event. There was also a kind of for a while they were doing kind of lead ups to the God in Three Persons thing, looking for opportunities to perform some of that material just to get it more in shape and more ready. And so there was a small performance with some art students of God in Three Persons, sort of as a tangent to that installation.
Great. And then there was another project I wanted to ask about that was just sort of, to me, it seemed to come out of nowhere. So there was that Bunny Boy emails book. And at one point there was a book that came out that had to do with the bad day on the Midway. But then not too long ago, the Residents actually wrote a book, a standalone book called Brick Eaters. And I thought it was a great book. It was really interesting. And how did the Residents come to write a book like that?
Well, there was at least one of the Residents, and more than one were into it, but one in particular took a lot of inspiration from Breaking Bad, the TV series. And it's like his point of view was that, the capsule summary of this TV series is, high school chemistry teacher becomes drug lord. And if in any other context, that would have had to have been a comedy. But the fact that they were actually able to pull this off as sort of like surreal drama, well, I mean, that's where the residents live. I mean, that's their wheelhouse. And so that then inspired him to kind of take that absurdist idea, but working more in a kind of a less comedic, more dramatic context. And then ultimately that's Brick Eaters is what kind of came out of that. And ultimately the majority of that was written on tour. When a band is on tour, the residents always say, we've got 2 hours out of every day that are important. The rest of the time, you're just getting ready for that 2 hours. And so there's a lot of free time to fill. And they do a lot of writing, either writing music or writing text or whatever, kind of filling those hours. I mean, they're not drug people, they're not alcoholics, so they have to fill that time somehow.
Great. Let's see, what else did I want to discuss? Well, let me ask you this also. So, you're the main sort of public relations person for the residents, representing them in interviews like this, and officer of the Cryptic Corporation. But you also are known for doing a lot of the residents' artwork, or, the vast majority, sometimes under the name, pornographics and other things like how, and there's been, the residents definitely have a very specific sort of visual feel to a lot of their projects that I assume you're kind of responsible for. So how do you come up with that stuff, or what?
Well, it usually works off. The residents are nothing if not kind of, the definition of a collaboration. And so things are constantly being discussed, bounced around, whatever. And usually, occasionally I may have an idea that kind of leads to those discussions, but usually something comes up from, one of the band members. And, they've kind of described their process as like, throwing spaghetti at the wall, and the shit that sticks gets more spaghetti thrown at it. And the more it sticks, the more density and layers get created. And then ultimately at some point, it's my job to visualize that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, so you're talking about collaborations. So I put out a notice on, there's different residents discussion boards and things on Facebook. And I mentioned that I was going to be chatting with you, and did anybody have any, things they wanted me to try to ask about. And one of the common themes that came up a lot is people were interested in collaborations that the residents have done over the years. And Snakefinger, of course, came up a lot from the early days. I was lucky enough to see you perform with Snakefinger at First Avenue in 1986. In fact,
wow,
that show was recorded for a limited edition cassette and CD and everything. So Snakefinger came up a lot, and Ronaldo and the Loaf came up a lot. And then, of course, also people wanted to hear about Hardy Fox. So do you have any thoughts on collaborations, and maybe those three specifically?
Going back to Snakefinger, Philip Lithman, he and I were actually fairly close. He was on tour in Austria when he died, and at that time, Eric Fellman, who I mentioned as the residence producer these days, Eric was sort of his band leader, and Eric is the one who actually discovered his body in a room. There was a venue, I forget the name of it, that the residents have played at in Austria that has like some sort of guest rooms. And so at times the bands will actually stay there. And that's where Philip and Eric and the band were staying the night he had the heart attack and died. But he was a great guy. He was somebody whose company I really enjoyed quite a bit. And was obviously an amazing musician. In terms of Hardy, my relationship with Hardy goes way back. Hardy and I were roommates together in college at Louisiana Tech in 1963. And I always tell the story that, we were combined by some early version of a computer because my last name is Fly and his last name was Fo. And we were both, at least for official purposes, Methodists at that time. So some computer, figured, okay, well, these will make good roommates. And I guess they didn't know how right they were because he and I really connected. And I have been as close to him, I suppose, as I have to virtually anybody, with the possible exception of my wife and my children. But as long-term relationships have a tendency to do, we had years where we were closer and years when we were further apart. And the point when he died, we were really not that close. He kind of announced that he had a brain tumor and had 6 weeks left to live. And, where he was living was not that close. I saw him twice in those last 6 weeks. Last time I saw him was maybe a week or 10 days before he died. And, the remarkable thing about it was that even though we were not really emotionally that close, we had a connection that whenever we would get together, that connection would, it's the way it is with people when you have strong connections. You may not see each other for a year or 2 years or maybe 10 years, but when you get together, that connection has a way of making itself known. And so the last two times I saw him were both very pleasant and very enjoyable. And I miss him to this day. I think of him on a regular basis. And in terms of other collaborations, there are a lot of things going on at this point. John Sanborn, that we've mentioned more than once, is certainly a significant collaborator with the residents these days. But they're also finishing right now a feature film project. And if you know anything at all about films, once again, a film really is the director gets a lot of the attention, but a film is a collaboration. You don't really get much more collaborative from an artistic point of view than a film. And one of the people that they're working with closely right now is a guy named Jim McKee, who is a professional film sound designer. And, there's the idea of sound design in a way permeates the residents' aesthetics always. So they're really enjoying working with him and collaborating with him. There are, once again, collaboration is a word I would use to, define the aesthetics of the residents.
Yeah, and another one who I really enjoyed, who was with you for many years and a few tours, is Molly Harvey. You've sometimes had some great female vocalists, and she was with you for Wormwood, Icky Flicks, Demons Dance Alone, and probably some others I'm forgetting. But how did you hook up with her?
interestingly, the residents had a studio back in the early 90s. And this was the studio where they did most of their CD-ROM projects, Freak Show and Bad Day on the Midway. And Molly was working in a coffee shop about a block away. and she's so charming and personable that she just struck up conversations with the different members of the group. And then at one point, I think she mentioned something about being a performer. And so the residents always like to check people out. They like to collaborate. They like to bring new people in. So I think it was Gingerbread Man that was the first thing that she worked on. She played one of the characters, I think the character of the Weaver, or maybe it was a different one. I'm not sure. But anyway, she played one of the characters on that CD-ROM in that album, and they just really connected. Unfortunately, she moved to Atlanta, so usually she performs with them when the residents are on tour and they play in Atlanta. And if she comes back here, they see her. The relationship is still good. It's just that she's not really around enough to be able to kind of collaborate on a regular basis. Another really strong collaboration was with a guy named Jim Lemke, who was a 3D artist on the Freak Show CD-ROM and Bad Day on the Midway, and he was a fantastic person. As the art person for the residents, the residents art director, I worked very closely with Jim on those projects, and he was great. He was fantastic. I've worked with a lot of people, and I've generally found people kind of fall into two categories. There's the people who are great artistically, but maybe not so great technically, which then takes a lot of work on my part. Then there are the people that are they're great technically, and they're not so great artistically. They're okay. But the number of people that I could say were great on both sides, I can count on one hand. And Jim Lemke was at the top of that list. I mean, he was an amazing artist and amazing technically too.
Yeah, and you bring up with him another one of my favorite residents eras is the Freak Show, Bad Day on the Midway, and Gingerbread Man. All had CD-ROM components, which at the time was cutting edge technology. But of course now you can't play it on anything. And like I mentioned, there was a book that came out, and there's different things. But I loved getting into those. Because there's different paths you can take on, like Bad Day on the Midway had different endings. And, I thought it was fantastic. It would be wonderful if those things were revisited, or if they could be presented on, some way to play it on today's equipment or whatever, because those were just great projects.
They were great projects. And there certainly have been conversations about resurrecting them one way or another. But, the reality is that these things are expensive. And Bad Day on the Midway had a $400,000 budget in 1994. It's the biggest budget the residents have ever worked with. So you can imagine what it would take to recreate that now. I mean, I think, once again, it's a project that never really saw the audience I feel like that it could have. And I think the intellectual property is still very valid. It's just a matter of finding somebody that's willing to put the money in to bring it back.
Yeah. And so both the Freak Show and I think Gingerbread Man have had special preserved editions. I don't think Bad Day has yet, right? I don't know if there's one of those coming for that.
I don't know. Richard Anderson, who's the product manager at Cherry Red, I've been working with him pretty closely on the whole preserve series. And the thing about Bad Day is that, most of these other things were music-based projects to begin with. So there is an album, or there is something fundamental there to then build a reissue off of. Whereas, the primary product, Bad Day, was the CD-ROM. And there's not much reason to bring that back in a form that nobody can play. So there's not as much material, I don't think. There's a soundtrack album for it, but there's not as much material there to be able to base that reissue off of. I don't know. Maybe Richard has something in mind. I don't know.
That's true. Yeah. And this is for people who don't know, who might be listening or watching to this, the Preserved series has been going on for a while, and just putting together these fantastic, new versions of classic Residents albums with tons of expanded material and lots of liner notes. And, they're well worth checking out. Do you know what the next planned ones coming up are? Or?
Yeah, they are working on Wormwood right now. And, Wormwood, based on stories from the Bible. Wormwood, I think, is going to be an 8 or 9 CD box set. I mean,
wow.
Yeah, I raised my eyebrows too. I mean, 8 or 9, wow. So I think that's going to come out first as a vinyl, as a 2 LP set, which I don't think that has ever come out as vinyl. And then it will be a multi-disc box set.
Wow, well, that's something to look forward to. And then also, you talked a little bit about it earlier, but then we kind of veered onto something else about working on this film. Now, I know at one point it was going to be called Double Trouble or something like that. And last I heard, you're changing the name and some of it's changing. But what's the current status of this film that's being worked on? Well,
what happened was that, and ultimately from an origin point of view, this harks all the way back to Violence Fest in the mid 70s. And, this was what the Residents were considering aiming to be the underground movie of all times. And the problem was that they really didn't have the resources to be able to shoot it as a film. So the video was a coming thing. They the whole thing, or everything that they did on video, 1/2-inch reel-to-reel black and white video, which was kind of referred to as industrial quality video at the time. And after working on this thing for 4 years, they realized that nobody was ever going to be able to see it unless they gathered a bunch of people around their living room and watched it on a TV, because the quality was so low. So the project got abandoned, but it has enough charm and enough interest that it's kind of hung around. And I think I mentioned of purity earlier. I was the enabler for Don Hardy, the filmmaker, on that project. And Don became very armed and intrigued by Bad Day on the Midway. Violence Fats. And so ultimately then stirred interest again in the Residents. And the idea of completing it has come up several times over the years, but eventually they kind of went, no, that's never going to happen. Too much of its charm is based on naivete, and you don't go back and recreate that. But what they thought was, okay, what if we took those same ideas and recontextualized them in a brand new screenplay, which they did. And then we started trying to raise money for that. And a certain amount of money was raised. About 20 or 25 minutes of the script was shot in order to create a fundraising trailer. And then, bam, all of a sudden, lockdown hits and tours canceled. Time opens up. And the Residents went, well, what are we going to do now? We don't have enough money to shoot this screenplay, but what if we write a new screenplay? Something we can shoot with the money that we do have. So what they did was they took the 20, 25 minutes that they had already shot and used that as flashback material, and then moved the whole story 5 years into the future. And so what was Double Trouble, the idea of Double Trouble being a reflection back on Violence Fats, then became Triple Trouble. And So Triple Trouble has been in production for almost a year now, and is and very close to being complete. We are looking at a September 27th deadline as the late deadline for entry into Sundance. And so while it won't be 100% complete at that point, it'll be 95%, close enough that it can be entered into Sundance. And so, yeah, it's been a very satisfying and rewarding project.
Great. And so on your website, or on the residence website, after the tour was canceled and that was announced, there was another message that said, yeah, we're all, I forget the exact wording, but we're all bummed about this and all that kind of stuff. But what artists do out of trouble and adversity, they create, and the residents are creating, stand by. So do you know of anything else besides what you've talked about already in Double Trouble that people can look out for, or is it all going to just kind of be a secret until it happens?
Well, there are a few things, but most of which we've mentioned. And, the film probably being the primary thing. And then they're trying to get that under control. Then they're going to move into the film soundtrack, which will probably be their next release. But there's another major project that's, shall we say, in the very beginning stages. And if indeed this continues to go forward, it'll probably be at least 2 or 3 years in the works. And that's too much in the early stages to talk about right now. But if indeed it does continue to go forward, it's a very interesting project.
All right. Well, great. I mean, like I say, I'm amazed how the residents over 50 years always seem to find a new way to do things, or something that's surprising. And so I look forward to anything that comes up. I've pretty much asked most of the questions that I had. I could just throw a couple of other things that people threw out there on the discussion groups, and these could be pretty quick answers if you want. But people are asking things like, what do you think is the most successful residence project in regards to artistic intention, and not as far as sales or popularity?
Well, I mean, I have several favorites of my own, and I would have to list Third Reich and Roll, Eskimo, God in Three Persons, and probably Dean's Dance Alone as being things, all of which I felt were very successful in terms of achieving what it was that the residents were attempting to do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those are all great projects. And again, I mean, it's so much in the residents. It's like there's just so much. It's like, wouldn't it be wonderful to have an Eskimo, tour or something like that? But I'm sure that would be very ambitious. Just sort of like, I guess the Mole Show, the first tour the residents ever did, was quite ambitious. They can't do everything. So, but they're all wonderful.
Yeah.
Things.
I mean, there's been a lot of conversation about Eskimo over the years. And at one point, there was a guy who was a programmer at the South Bank Center in London. And this is probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And the South Bank Center was shut down for remodeling or something. So they were still trying to find ways to produce other projects in town, not directly at the South Bank Center. And this guy's name is Glenn Max. Glenn really wanted to do Eskimo as an ice show. I mean, it's like, Eskimo on ice, I mean, he had, his eyes would get big every time he started talking about it. But needless to say, it didn't happen. But there've been a lot of conversations about that over the years.
Great. So some other people were, I guess a couple of the people were asking about the American Composer Series. And if there's any, I mean, I know that was a great project. You did James Brown and Hank Williams and John Philip Sousa. And some others. And then it kind of ended because it was like, that was one, two sides of vinyl, and then vinyl went out of. So people are wondering, like, are there any like outtakes lying around of other groups or anything from American Compose that might be a box set or a preserved set? Or
yeah, I think so. I've heard Richard mention that, and I know, one of the things that happened as a result of, Hardy Fox actually retired about 2 years before he died. And one of the surprises to me, was that after he had retired and his portion of the Cryptic Corporation was bought by Cherry Red and MVD, Music Video Distributors. Hardy says, okay, well, you need to come up here and get all these archive boxes. And it's like, he had been the keeper of the residents' tape archive as well as their product archive. So all of a sudden I was having to rent a truck and 3 guys to go up to his place and get 100 boxes. That is like, oh my, 100 boxes? What am I going to do with all this stuff? And to be honest, I was not too happy about it at that time. But as it turned out, of those 100 boxes, about 20 or 25 were tapes, which included a lot of outtakes, remixes, live versions, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of this has become the basis of the preserved series. So I'm pretty sure there is some stuff in there. I know at one point, they were talking about doing Sun Ra as part of the as part of the American Composer Series. And I think maybe 1 or 2 Sun Ra things were at least experimented on. And so I know there is material around, and I think Cherry Red is planning a box set on that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I know there is at least one Sun Ra that came out on some collection or CD or something. So I've got at least one Residence Sun Ra track in my collection. And of course, at one point, being from Minneapolis here, there was a version of Prince 1999 that the Residents did. And so, yeah, it'd be cool to hear some of that stuff. And then, well, just one other project some people were wondering about, and yeah, I'm curious on this too. It's another way that the residents have found to interact with fans and friends and whatnot. Is there was this whole I Am a Resident project, which was fairly recent, and maybe 5 years ago or something. Yeah. I can't remember, but they asked for the people to record their versions of Resident songs. And actually, instead of just releasing those, it went a step further, where the residents kind of remixed some of those into like different sound collages. And so a bunch of Residents fans got to be Residents and be on a Residents album. And so that was a pretty cool project.
Yeah. When the Residents put that out, to the fans, their point of view was, okay, well, we'll get maybe 50, 60, 70 songs, and we'll pick out the dozen or so best and make an album of that. And then they were completely blown away when they got 200 songs, not only 200 songs, but they were then blown away by the quality of them. And they felt like, well, just picking out 12 or 15 to put on an album, that's just not doing justice to what's been done here. So ultimately, they had the idea of kind of doing the Third Reich and roll treatment to that material, editing it, remixing, overdubbing, whatever. And again, it was a very satisfying project.
Yeah, and then there's even this is separate from that project, but I think at least twice now the residents have recently asked people to submit videos wearing costumes, not wearing, doing whatever they want, like dancing to certain bits of residence music or something. And then these were combined into the videos that were released.
Yeah. Once again, John Sanborn has been responsible for some of that stuff. I think it was the Night Flight video, and Constantinople, one of the all-time fan favorites. I think John put out a call to get people to do, here I come, Constantinople, on camera. And once again, he got a huge response to it. So he cut out a lot of those little clips and then added them into the Constantinople video that was projected as background for the Night Flight show.
Yeah. Constantinople, like we're doing this for KFAI radio, and back in March, KFAI had a 24 hours of new wave day where they streamed 24 hours of people doing, quote unquote new wave material. And I recorded a 2-hour segment for that for KFAI streaming service. And I did a whole residence set in there. I mean, some resident stuff might be could be considered new wave or the fans like that. And anyway, I played Constantinople as one of those songs, along with Snakefinger, Man in the Dark Sedan, a couple tracks from the commercial album. I believe I played Picnic Boy because I believe isn't Lane Lovitch did vocals on that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, right.
And then there was another song that I think Andy Partridge of XCC was on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one that is, but yeah, he is on one of them.
Yeah, cool. And for people who aren't don't know everything about the residents who might be checking this out, check out the commercial album too, because it's 41-minute songs, and it's another brilliant one. Well, yeah, I mean that's. Let me just end with a couple like really other quick ones that people had asked about, and then we'll wrap it up with anything else you have to say. But somebody just wanted to know yours or the residents' favorite movies or current artists or things like to listen to for personal entertainment these days.
I'm a big Fellini fan, as are a lot of the residents. So I've certainly enjoyed his movies over and over again over the years. But I'm a big classic movie fan too. I mean, I certainly see contemporary movies. There's one that just came out called The Green Knight. I think that I've read really interesting things about, but haven't been able to get out to a movie theater and see yet. But I'm a Alfred Hitchcock fan. I'm a huge fan of film noir. I love to watch film noir. In terms of people that I listen to, there is a Finnish group called Amalaman Vasarat, I think. That I find really, really interesting. They're almost like a kind of a slightly ethnic Eastern European kind of sound, but within kind of a punk attitude. And it's a fairly large group, 7 or 8 people with a bunch of horns. They're really, really interesting. There's another guy. Ibrahim Malouf, I think, who is an Algerian trumpet player who is in Paris these days. And I think is doing really, really interesting music. I listen to music a lot, and I listened to Pandora for a long time and then switched over to Spotify. So, and I have probably my personal Spotify collection is probably about 1,000 songs or so. So I'm listening to new stuff all the time.
Great. And then the one last question that somebody had submitted is, how do the residents keep it fresh after 50 years?
Well, I think they ask themselves that same question on a regular basis. But the reality is that, one, they're still having fun. And two, they like each other. They enjoy each other's company. And so that alone, it's that statement that I made earlier about me personally having connected with Hardy Fox. It's a similar kind of a thing. When you connect with people in a meaningful way, there's just a kind of energy that comes with that feeds off of that connection. And that sort of is the essence of the residents, and that's what keeps them moving forward.
Cool. And here, I just want to show you this just to see what you think. I don't know if you can see.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
I've got the residents tattooed there. I got,
that's the beauty, yeah.
There's so many iconic images of the residents, and of course, everybody thinks of the eyeballs. But then it went from the 4 eyeballs to all of a sudden it was 3 eyeballs with Mr. Skull, and I really love that look. So that's part of my tattoos. So
yeah, that's a great one.
Residents for life, as they say. It's on there. All right. Well, yeah, thanks so much for taking time to chat with us this afternoon. And just, is there anything else that we didn't cover already that you want to talk about or tell people, or anything else on your mind?
Well, we've pretty much covered anything that I wanted to. I would just like to say, just to thank you for the interest and the support, because ultimately it's because of people like you and the other fans out there that the residents are able to continue to exist. And personally, that's a great thing. And, many thanks.
All right.
We all continue.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, thank you. And I hopefully when it's safe, we'll see you down the road in some project or other, or live show, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope so.
Right.
Sooner rather than later. Yeah.
I got 2 quick little things. These are not, one is a question, and then one I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to do a legal ID for the radio station. Just a drop.
Okay.
I'll do that after I ask this though. So Jon has showed you all of his residence material here, and there's a thing that floats around my house all the time that I'm wondering if you're aware of, and if you've considered legal action thereof. You were talking about intellectual property earlier. This is the vacuum cleaner in my house. It's manufactured. Okay. It's a Dyson vacuum cleaner. It's a really thin sort of thing, but every time I look at it from across the room, there's an uncanny resemblance to some intellectual property that you owned. Yeah. I'm wondering if you've considered any sort of a compensation.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I can't say I've seen one of those. I guess I'll have to talk to my lawyer, huh?
It might be worth looking into. They're pretty popular. You can get them at Target or something like that. They're all over the place. So.
The weird thing is, we have been trying to copyright the eyeball with the top hat on it as a trademark for about 4 or 5 years now. And part of our government seems to have become frozen. And, we have a guy that we're working with. He can't explain it. He had a guy he was working with the government. He finally said, get rid of that guy. Give me somebody new. And that was at the beginning of this year, and it still hadn't gone through. So I don't know what the reality is. I guess it will happen eventually.